My name's Ryan. I'm 46, and I live in a quiet neighborhood in Cedar Rapids, Iowa. You know the kind. Little lawns, kids on bikes, the occasional neighbor waving from across the street. I thought my life was pretty standard. I had a steady job managing a small logistics firm, a mortgage that wasn't killing me, and a girlfriend I'd been with for almost 3 years named Laura. Laura was one of those people who could light up a room, but there was always this flicker of something behind her smile, like a shadow you only noticed if you stared long enough. We met through a mutual friend, hit it off fast, and before long, she was leaving her toothbrush at my place and making plans for our future. I thought we were building something real. The first hint of trouble was subtle, almost too quiet to catch. She started needing more me time, long weekends with her friends, sudden late work meetings. I brushed it off. We're both adults with careers, right? A little space is normal. Or so I told myself. But then one night, as we were watching TV, she turned to me with this weird mixture of guilt and defiance. She said she needed a break. Not a breakup, just a break to find herself. My stomach twisted, but I nodded like a fool, trying to play it cool. Told her I understood. She packed a bag that night and left. I didn't chase her. I just sat there in the dim light of the living room, staring at the TV like it could give me an answer. I told myself it was temporary. She just needed space. But deep down, I knew something was off. A week passed, then two. I gave her the space she asked for, tried to stay busy with work, even took up jogging again just to keep my mind from spinning in circles. But as the days dragged on, something in me shifted. The initial sadness was wearing thin, and what replaced it was this gnawing irritation. It was stupid, really. I started noticing little things that didn't add up. Mutual friends who suddenly went quiet. A few awkward interactions with people who usually wouldn't hesitate to say hi. Then one of Laura's friends, the one who always had a few too many a happy hour, accidentally let it slip. Laura wasn't off finding herself. She was in a hotel downtown with a guy from her yoga class. I felt this hot rush of disbelief and rage, but it fizzled almost as quickly as it ignited. I sat there in my car, parked outside a gas station, listening to the details spill out like oil on concrete. She had lied. The break wasn't about space or self-discovery. It was about sleeping around without having to feel guilty. That realization didn't shatter me like I thought it would. It just left me cold, like flipping a switch in my head. For the first time, I saw Laura not as the woman I loved, but as someone who had been playing me for a fool. After that night, something snapped in me. I stopped waiting by the phone. No more checking my texts. No more sleepless nights wondering what she was doing or who she was with. I packed up the few things she'd left behind: a pair of slippers, a toothbrush, a half-empty bottle of fancy shampoo, and tossed them into a box. Not out of spite, but because I needed to clear the space she'd taken up in my home. And in my head. The next day, when she showed up out of the blue, it was almost laughable. There she was on my doorstep, her hair done up like she was on her way to brunch, her eyes watery with that familiar guilt meets innocence look. She started with the typical lines. She was confused. She'd made a mistake. She missed me. I just stood there, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. I didn't interrupt her, didn't nod along like I might have done before. When she finished, she looked at me, waiting for the moment when I'd fold, when I'd invite her back and like nothing happened. But instead, I stepped aside and pointed to the box. Told her, calm as you please, that her things were there, that I was done. I think she thought I was bluffing. Her face twisted, her mouth open like she was about to protest, but nothing came out. She stared at me, really stared like she was seeing me for the first time. And maybe she was. Maybe the man she thought she could keep dangling like some backup plan wasn't standing there anymore. After she left, after she finally picked up that box and drove off, I expected to feel hollow, heartbroken. But what I felt instead was nothing, just this quiet, steady relief. Like I'd finally put down a burden I didn't even realize I'd been carrying. I thought about the last 3 years with her, about all the times I'd overlooked things, the flirtations I'd brushed off, the sudden mood swings, the way she always seemed to need more while giving less. I'd been so focused on making her happy, on keeping things smooth, that I hadn't noticed I was slowly fading from my own life. That realization hit me harder than her betrayal. I wasn't just angry at her. I was angry at myself for letting it happen. I started to take stock of everything. My job, my friends, the hobbies I'd abandoned, the way I'd stopped seeing my sister for Sunday dinners, how I'd let Laura's wants and needs eclipse my own. I realized I'd been living in her orbit, not my own. And so, I started to rebuild. I called my sister, apologized for being distant, and made plans to visit that weekend. I dusted off my old guitar, started jogging again for me, not as a distraction. I said yes to the guys from work who'd been asking me to join them for drinks. Bit by bit, I started reclaiming my life. Meanwhile, word got around. Cedar Rapids isn't exactly a big place. I heard through mutual friends that Laura's grand plan didn't work out quite the way she'd imagined. The guy from yoga wasn't interested in playing house. She was seen out at bars more often, drinking with a bitterness that clung to her like a second skin. One friend even said she'd tried texting me again, just to talk. I blocked her number, and that, more than anything, made it clear. I wasn't heartbroken. I wasn't pining for her. I wasn't even mad anymore. I was just done. It was like waking up from a long, restless sleep and realizing I was finally free to live my own life. The days that followed were strangely quiet. No more text pings, no more surprise knocks on the door. It was like a layer of static had been lifted from my life, and for the first time in years, I could hear myself think. I started spending evenings alone, not out of loneliness, but by choice. I'd cook dinner, pour a glass of wine, and sit out on the back porch as the sun set behind the houses. I realized how long it had been since I'd done something just for myself, with no one else's needs tugging at me. There was peace in the simplicity. It wasn't long before people started noticing. My sister called to ask how I was holding up, probably expecting a sob story, but when I told her I was really fine, there was this long pause. She said I sounded more like myself than I had in years. Even my coworkers at the logistics firm commented that I seemed lighter, like a weight had been lifted. And then came the twist I didn't expect. One evening, I got a message from Laura's cousin, someone I hadn't seen in months, who'd always seemed a little out of place at family gatherings. She told me Laura had been telling anyone who'd listened that I was the one who abandoned her, painting me as the villain. At first, I was tempted to set the record straight, to tell everyone exactly what had happened. But then I stopped. I realized it didn't matter. I didn't owe anyone an explanation, especially not to people who had already picked sides before knowing the full story. Let them believe what they wanted. My life was moving forward, and dragging it backward with gossip and explanations wasn't worth it. Laura's cousin ended the message with a quiet apology for what I wasn't sure. Maybe for believing her at first. Maybe for realizing too late what was really going on. Either way, I thanked her and moved on. The real kicker came a few days later. I ran into Laura at the grocery store of all places. She looked rough, hair unwashed, makeup smudged, like she'd been running on fumes. She didn't have that polished, confident air she used to carry. For a moment, she just stared at me, then tried to muster that old smile. I didn't return it. Instead, I just nodded, paid for my groceries, and left. No words, no scene, just quiet. Deliberate distance. That night, I lay in bed thinking about the way she'd looked, not with pity, but with clarity. She had made her choice, and I had made mine. It was a Tuesday night when it really sank in. I just come back from grabbing dinner with a few guys from work. A small step, but it felt like I was reclaiming parts of myself that had been buried for years. I walked into my house, put my keys down, and for the first time in months, there was no tension pulling at my shoulders. No weight of wondering if I was saying the right thing, doing enough to keep someone else happy. I stood in the doorway for a moment, listening to the silence. It wasn't the kind of silence that screamed at you. It was the quiet that felt steady, solid, like I was finally alone with my thoughts, and they weren't tearing me apart. I made a drink, sat down on the couch, and realized I wasn't heartbroken. Not in the way I thought I'd be. There was no sobbing, no overwhelming grief. Just this low, steady pulse of annoyance. Not at Laura, though she deserved it, but at myself. At how much I'd given away, how many pieces of myself I'd sacrificed just to keep the peace, to avoid confrontation. I let her take up space in my life for so long that when she finally left, when she chose to leave, it was like the air cleared. That was the real twist. It wasn't heartbreak. It wasn't devastation. It was freedom. And the part that twisted the knife just a bit, knowing she probably thought I'd be shattered. That she was the one walking away from the poor, pathetic guy who would never get over her. But instead, I was sitting there with a drink in hand, feeling more like myself than I had in years. I thought about texting her, not to rekindle anything, but just to say, thanks for leaving, for setting me free. But I didn't. There was no point. If anything, silence was the best answer. The next morning, I woke up to the sun streaming through the window and realized I hadn't felt that lightness in a long, long time. It's funny how quickly things shift when you stop chasing what's broken. The quiet turned into calm. My days fell into a new, simple rhythm. Work, dinner, maybe a walk or a show in the evening. I started reconnecting with old friends I drifted from, Not because I was lonely, but because I was ready to live my life again on my terms. About a month after Laura left, the texts started trickling in. First from her, then from a mutual friend who said she was worried about Laura. Apparently, her grand adventure hadn't turned out the way she'd hoped. The yoga guy had cut things off almost as quickly as they started. She'd been seen out drinking, alone, or with random guys who barely knew her. The friend's message was half concern, half gossip. She's really not doing well. I think she misses you. I didn't reply. Not because I was being cruel, but because there was nothing left to say. Then came the twist I didn't see coming. Laura showed up at my office. I was sitting in the break room, sipping a bad cup of coffee, when I heard my name called out softly. I looked up, and there she was, not the polished, confident Laura I'd once loved, but a shadow of that. Her hair was a mess, her clothes rumpled, her eyes red-rimmed from crying or lack of sleep. She tried to smile, but it barely reached her eyes. She asked if we could talk, and for a moment, I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. I told her she could talk, but I wasn't leaving work for it. So we stood there, awkwardly, with the hum of the vending machines behind us, as she spilled out her regrets. How she'd made a mistake. How she'd thought I was the problem, but realized too late it was her all along. How she'd spiraled, her word, not mine. I listened, really listened. And then I told her, quietly but firmly, that I hoped she'd find her footing, but I wasn't going to be part of that journey. That I deserved better than what she had given me, and I wasn't going back. The look on her face, part disbelief, part regret, part wounded pride, was almost enough to make me waver. But I didn't. I left her there in the break room and went back to my desk. I could feel her eyes on my back, but I didn't turn around. That night, after everything, I found myself sitting on the back steps of my house, a cold beer in hand, watching the sky fade from blue to inky black. The streetlights blinked on, one by one, and the faint hum of crickets filled the air. It was a quiet I hadn't known in years, not just an absence of sound, but a quiet inside my own head. I thought back to Laura's visit at work, the way she'd looked like a shadow of herself, the desperation in her voice. And I realized something that felt like both a punch and a release. I didn't feel sorry for her. Not anymore. There was no pang of guilt, no urge to comfort her, no instinct to make things right. I felt free, and that freedom felt unfamiliar. For so long, I've been the guy who kept the peace, who made sure everyone else's world didn't crumble, even if it meant mine did. I've been the one patching holes in a sinking ship, trying to pretend the leaks didn't exist. But now, sitting there with a beer in my hand and the cool night air brushing against my face, I realized I wasn't holding that ship together anymore. I wasn't broken. I wasn't angry. I wasn't lost. I was done. And for the first time in a long time, that didn't feel like defeat. It felt like winning. I stayed on those steps for a long while, watching the stars emerge one by one, breathing in the kind of peace that only comes when you finally let go of something heavy you didn't even realize you'd been carrying. It wasn't about her. It wasn't even about me. It was about stepping out from under the weight of it all and realizing the ground beneath my feet was still solid. After that night, life settled into something that felt almost like normal. Not the normal I'd known before Laura, but a new kind of rhythm, one built entirely on my terms. I started showing up for myself in small ways. I rearranged the furniture in the living room, something Laura always said she'd get to but never did. I cleaned out the fridge, tossed all the half-used jars and expired takeout containers, and stocked it with food I actually liked. I made my space mine again. I reconnected with my sister, taking her out to brunch and listening as she caught me up on her life. I let my friends pull me back into their circle, went to game night, even laughed until my sides hurt over some stupid inside joke I'd almost forgotten. It was strange how easy it was to step back into myself once I stopped trying to be what Laura needed. I realized how much of my life I've been living for her, not because she asked, but because I thought it was what I was supposed to do. The way she made everything about her, her plans, her mood, her needs, had crept into every corner of my world. And now, with her gone, it was like pulling up weeds and finding space for something real to grow. The best part? I wasn't waiting for her anymore. Not waiting for her to call, to show up at my door, to send a text begging me to take her back. I'd blocked her number, cut ties with the mutual friends who still tried to pass along her half-hearted apologies. I'd closed that chapter, nailed it shut, and shelved it for good. I realized that real healing didn't come from pretending it never happened or trying to erase the past. It came from sitting with the truth of it, owning my part in it, and then making a conscious choice to move forward without her. And for the first time in a long, long while, I wasn't looking back. It wasn't long after that, maybe a couple of weeks, when she tried to creep back into my life. Not directly. That would have been too obvious. But through those same mutual friends who hadn't quite figured out where they stood. They'd pass along comments. Laura was really struggling. She just needed to talk. She was finally realizing what she lost. At first, I felt a flicker of guilt. The old part of me, the one that used to bend over backward to keep people comfortable, wanted to reach out to offer her a hand. But then I caught myself. I wasn't responsible for her choices. I wasn't her safety net. And so I said no, politely but firmly. To her, through the people she sent as messengers. To the old patterns that had kept me tangled in her drama. It felt strange, almost powerful, to reclaim that word. No, no, I wasn't going to meet for coffee. No, I wasn't going to hear her out. No, I wasn't going to carry her regret like it was mine to bear. And with every no, I felt a little bit stronger. I realized that love, real love, isn't about saving someone else from themselves. It's about building something together, something solid and steady. Laura hadn't been capable of that, and maybe I hadn't been either, not then. But I was learning. By the time the texts and messages finally stopped, I was no longer waiting for them to stop. I was already moving forward, already writing a new story, one that didn't revolve around her. It's funny how quickly the noise fades when you finally step out of it. One morning, I woke up, made my coffee, and realized I hadn't thought about Laura in days. Her face, her voice, they were slipping further into the background, becoming just another chapter of my past. I found myself doing things I hadn't done in years. I dusted off my old hiking boots and took long walks through the wooded trails outside Cedar Rapids. I started cooking for myself. Real meals, not just whatever was quick or easy. I read books I bought years ago and never opened. I found a kind of quiet joy in the simple things I'd ignored for too long. Friends started to comment, noticing how different I seemed. Lighter, happier, more present. My sister even joked that it was like I'd gone through some secret makeover, one that wasn't about looks, but about spirit. And she wasn't wrong. It was around that time I realized that Laura's chaos had become my normal, and stepping away from it felt like learning to breathe again. I didn't need the drama, the apologies, the endless cycles of breaking and fixing. I didn't need her. For the first time in years, I felt whole. It wasn't about replacing her or filling the space she left behind. It was about remembering who I was before her and realizing that I still liked that guy. That he was enough all along. Months later, I stood in my kitchen one Saturday morning, pouring myself a cup of coffee, when I realized something profound. I wasn't just surviving, I was living. The version of me who had once sat in the dark, wondering why he wasn't enough, was gone. In his place stood a man who had learned the hardest lesson of all. Sometimes, the best way to love yourself is to walk away from what no longer serves you. The twists and turns, the betrayals, the endless apologies, they were behind me now. Laura had become just a name, a shadow in the background of a life that no longer belonged to her. I didn't hate her. I didn't wish her ill. I simply felt nothing. That was the real victory. It wasn't dramatic, like a movie ending. There was no grand scene where I declared my independence to the world. No speeches, just this quiet understanding between me and myself. A silent agreement that I deserved better and was no longer willing to settle for less. I spent the rest of that morning sitting by the window, sipping coffee, watching the world wake up. The peace I'd found wasn't flashy or loud. It was steady, like the rhythm of my own heartbeat. And in that quiet moment, I realized I was finally free.